This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
Yes, you heard that right, people. This is the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast, and you are tuned into the Friday edition of our two-show weekly episodes here on the YouTubes. Also available for your viewing pleasure on Rumble, which link for that will always be in the description for you to go check out. If it's your first time checking out the show, welcome aboard. Glad you decided to stop in, and hope you plan to stick around for the entertainment, because we're going to be recapping some pro wrestling today on the show, particularly NXT and AEW Dynamite, as you can, probably determine by the title. As noted before, we have two podcasts that we host each week. We have a Monday and a Friday show. Monday's show, we devote the material on that program for AEW Rampage, NWA Power, and weekend pay-per-view analysis and coverage. And on the off weeks where there is not a pay-per-view to discuss, we dedicate a block of that show to doing some in-depth discussions on my article content that I currently write for the Chairshot website. And Friday's show, well, if you didn't watch Monday's episode, first of all, I highly encourage you to go check that out. But traditionally, that show was the recap show for NXT and AEW Dynamite. However, given the direction NXT has gone in recent weeks, we're going to be taking a different approach going forward with the Friday show. And instead of talking about NXT each week, we're going to be replacing that with talking about some of the classic wrestling content that is slowly but surely making its way up on the Peacock network. Specifically, we are going to be delving into a retro review series of NWA WCW Studio Wrestling from the beginning of the Peacock library from November of 1985 and working our way up from there. And we're also going to be taking a look at World Class Championship Wrestling from same month of November. However, we're going to begin that review series in from November of 1982. So, should be a lot of fun, and I think it'll be a nice little detox from trying to force myself to continually find ways to justify some of this modern era wrestling that doesn't really appeal to me all that much. So if you love classic content and you would like to hear my perspective going forward on wrestling that I basically grew up watching and appreciating, hopefully you'll stick around, because I think those shows will be genuinely interesting, and it'll be a lot of fun to go back and watch some of that stuff to see how it stacks up in the modern era. And of course, don't worry, I'm not dropping AEW from the mix altogether. In fact, judging by my YouTube analytics each week, the AEW shows are usually where the bulk of the viewership comes into play. So, either people really like hearing me rant about AEW every week, or it's just happenstance that those are the higher viewed videos. Either way, we will see how this retro series goes in contrast with pairing that up against AEW Dynamite for the Friday shows. And again, that will kickstart next week. Aside from that, as always, make sure to comment, rate, and subscribe to stay posted on all future FSWR content. Again, you can also find the show on Rumble and check me out there if you'd like. And speaking of the Chairshot, as I just previously mentioned, I do write article content for them each week. Links for all my most recent publications will always be in the description for you to check out. They are short opinion pieces, so if you like opinion content and you like reading perspectives on wrestling ideas and stories that are not necessarily being discussed in the mainstream on a week-to-week basis, I aim to write content that leans outside the box. So I highly encourage you to go check them out when you get a chance. Would greatly appreciate all the feedback and support I can get. That said, I think we're about ready to dive into this thing, so let's get going with the show. And we will get rolling on my version of the NXT season finale. And thank God, because Halloween Havoc doesn't necessarily have a great track record in the history of professional wrestling. Anyone remember the Yeti? Actually, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't the Hogan Warrior rematch from WCW a Halloween Havoc pay-per-view match? You know what? Now that I think about it, that's probably what this show was ultimately missing, was a man in the mirror angle. Anyway, we begin with the match that... God, I still can't believe this is a thing they booked after that three-way last week. It's 6 girls, the only one of them being a worker I'd consider athletically gifted being Io Shirai. And to make matters worse, it's a ladder match. It's Gigi Dolan, JC Jane versus Indy Hartwell and Portia Parada versus Zoe Stark and Io Shirai for the women's tag titles. And pretty much the best thing I can say about this match is that no one died. Although I'll get to that goddamn Io Shirai spot in a minute. We had just about every contrived and choreographed ladder spot you could safely do with women, including the stupid thing where someone's climbing the ladder and they get shoved off and they try to spring off the ropes and land on a pile. And I guess because everyone saw Ricochet pull it off one time, they're like, well, if Ricochet can do it, surely I can. Well, Zoe tried, and she clearly fucked her ankle up in some manner. To what degree she tweaked it, I don't know, but she was visibly limping for pretty much the rest of the match. And then, of course, 10 minutes later, she tries some kind of corkscrew plancha onto one of the girls, and not only did she not stick the landing, but she landed directly on the same ankle that she twisted. For what purpose, you ask? To pop the fucking crowd. Lots of spots with girls springing onto ladders, getting pulled down, that whole deal. Yeah, at least I can credit this as being one of those rare ladder matches where they actually try to climb for the thing hanging above the ring instead of setting up some kind of multi-dimensional contraption with ladders, just to do a stupid spot later on. Although we did get plenty of those. Anyway, the only thing I really want to talk about here is that Io Shirai spot, which... how she didn't die, I'm still trying to run the numbers in my head. I can merely chalk it up to an act of God that saved her. So, Io's up at the top of the ladder, and Indy goes to dump Io off of the ladder so that she goes crashing through the gimmick ladder set up between the ring apron and the announce table. And I had watched this at least 12 to 13 times because had Io landed in any other way on this fall, she would be dead. No question. Indy tips the ladder over, and what was probably supposed to happen is the ladder would sort of deflect off the ropes and bounce back, and then Io would land back first on the ladder. The spot's been done 100,000 times before, so it's not like the girls had this in mind and no one knew how it was going to turn out. What happened, though, was that because the ladder was so big and because they had it too close to the ropes already, instead of the ladder bouncing off the ropes, it actually ends up going more than halfway over the top rope, and not only does it send Io flailing into the air like a projectile, but the ladder flies up in the air and almost does a full rotation. And actually, if you catch the replay too, the ladder was very close to tumbling over the ropes and possibly catching Io in the head, which would have even been more of an utter disaster. And, you can tell it didn't go according to plan because even Indy was visibly distressed about the whole ordeal. You're probably sitting there like, oh my God, I just killed someone on live national television. And again, all for the purpose of popping the crowd. Because we want to create moments. We need shit for the YouTube highlight reel. No, actually, what you dumb motherfuckers need to do is teach your talents how to fucking wrestle so that they can have long, safe, and successful careers and not have to retire before age 40 because their bodies have been put through glass and thumbtacks for a good chunk of their youth. And to say I was pissed at this point and wanted to turn the rest of the show off in complete disgust would probably have been accurate at the time, but I think the one thing that saved it was pretty much immediately after that spot, they took the match home and Gigi climbed up the ladder and grabbed the belts. A finish that everyone saw coming a mile away, by the way. I mean, I know you're going to have people overrating it because, we've completely lowered our standards as to what constitutes as great pro wrestling anymore, but I'm so sick of these goddamn ladder matches. I'm tired of highlight reels. I'm tired of engineered and choreographed spots, and I'm tired of unnecessary career-shortening bumps. Teach your talent how to wrestle. Get them to master a fucking lockup before you send them out there to do garbage indie-level bar matches. You want to know why so many guys and gals get hurt in the business today? It's because of bullshit like this. And quite frankly, I'm not sorry if you liked the match or you thought it was good. It was an unmemorable, sloppy spot fest with a bunch of girls that don't know how to wrestle. And before you throw in the obligatory misogynist card, I've seen plenty of great women's matches in the last 10 years. I just saw one at WrestleMania this past year. The claim is not this match sucked because it's a women's match. The claim is this match sucked because it wasn't a good wrestling match, period. It's crash dummy blanket covering for green talent that isn't ready for prime time. And I'm tired of seeing it. Learn how to take a decent looking bump off a shoulder tackle before you go taking 20-foot falls off of ladders onto gimmicks. So after that put me in a sour mood for the rest of the night, we had part 1 of this Carmelo Hayes Trick Gargano Haunted House of Horrors segment that actually provided me with the wake-up call for why giving up on the show was probably the best for my overall health and well-being. By the way, where exactly was this haunted house? How exactly did Carmelo and Trick know where to find this house? How did they just so happen to know Dexter Lumis and Johnny Gargano were going to be there? Many unanswered questions on this already questionable program. To say nothing of the multiple camera crew that also was shooting this. Oh, and plenty of bad acting, but I mean, that kind of goes without saying at this point, doesn't it? With a quick video pre-tape with Kaylee Ray informing us that she was the longest reigning women's champion in nearly 60 years. To which my response was, when in the hell did Kaylee Ray ever win the women's title in NXT? Or was she talking about the UK women's title that no one cares about? So remember last week when Eli Drake beat Grayson Waller to become the host of the show? Well, it turns out the finish meant absolutely nothing because Waller showed up anyway to host the show. So, even in NXT, match tips don't necessarily mean anything. It's good to know. Anyway, somewhere in the skit, Joe Gacy interrupted to preach more of his social justice garbage that no one reacts to. And that led to whatever in the fuck this Malik Blade Joe Gacy match was. They're doing stuff for a few minutes, and somewhere early on, they show a split screen with a man walking into the building. And the announcers seem to know who it was, although I'm not sure how they could tell given the lighting and the fact that his fucking back was turned. Anyway, it is that bald Baron Corbin with the neck tattoo guy. So he shows up, and he grabs Malik by the jaw on the outside, and Gacy's pleading with him to let him go. And if you're sitting there wondering, well, wouldn't that be grounds for a DQ due to outside interference? Just stop. You're putting way too much thought into this. And finally, Gacy hits his springboard clothesline and wins. And that's all I'm going to say about this, and that's probably the last I will ever say about Joe Gacy. Complete waste of 3 minutes. Had some wacky backstage deal with a bunch of NXT talents in a party room, most of whom I had no idea who their names were. Although, give it 3 or 4 years, most of them probably won't be under contract anyway. And Waller's just kind of walking around talking to people, and eventually Cameron Grimes shows up in an astronaut outfit trying to work some of his gay magic with the ladies, which does not go too well for poor Grimes. I will say, though, Grimes taking the cold approach as opposed to wasting his time on dating apps, I mean, it's probably going to work out better for him in the long run. So, perhaps he is making progress in the dating market. So then we had this Roderick Strong Open Challenge deal, which got answered by, well, who other than the second best cruiserweight they have on the roster right now, Odyssey Jones. And if we're being fair here, I vaguely recall Roddy having a great match with Keith Lee about a year ago. Although comparing Keith Lee's skill to Odyssey Jones' skill is kind of partial. I mean, I wouldn't say there was anything wrong with the match. Not really sure what the point of it was. At least I can make an argument that if Roddy was the babyface here, him overcoming the odds of a giant specimen like Odyssey Jones would be a fitting story. And the only thing this really did was make Odyssey look like a dweeb. Of course, they've been kind of doing that with him for a while now, so either Vince has already given up on him or he's getting called up to the main roster for his undercard run of doom. I guess we'll see which one plays out. We had more goofiness with the partygoers in the back. Robert Stone ended up getting slammed through a table at the end, which was kind of funny. But I think that has less to do with the material he was given and more so just because Robert Stone is just really talented. Oh, yeah, and I did note, Kyle O'Reilly was also there, being wacky. Probably more so thinking, I was just main eventing this program at the beginning of the year for the NXT title. My, how the mighty have fallen. Anyway, we end up getting this Mandy Rose Raquel Gonzalez women's title match. Raquel riding in her motorcycle here, which was kind of cool. And it ended up being a street fight because, well, I guess the precedent we're now setting on the show is that the women can't wrestle, so we can mask that by producing garbage hardcore crap with furniture. Because everyone pops for a kendo stick shot, right? Yeah, not like we see that in every fucking hardcore match anymore. And it's unfortunate that we couldn't just get a straight match with these two because it probably would have been perfectly fine if they didn't have to throw the weapons in there. I've actually kind of grown to like Raquel over the last year. When she first started, I thought she was the shits. To be blunt, she was. But you know what she did? She got her ass in the gym, she trained, she worked on her promos, she stayed consistent, and she got better in such a short time. And I respect that. So they do the weapons match, and it's a weapons match. They did do a relatively creative spot on the outside where Mandy kind of trapped Raquel into one of the announcers' chairs by wedging a kendo stick underneath her arms and basically just booted her over the face. And by the way, good for Mandy for calling out the dumbass referee for not making the count on the outside. It's a fucking street fight, and he's standing there going, no, it's not false count anywhere. The finish has to take place in the ring. Fuck off. Seriously, are we sure Russo's not overseeing anything on the creative team here? Anyway, they did some more stuff for a while, and of course we get to the finish, which is I mean, honestly, where the real intrigue of this match comes in. So Raquel ends up spearing Mandy through a table in the corner for a near fall, and she's leaning up against the ropes momentarily. And all of a sudden, Dakota Kai shows up underneath a Grim Reaper cloak and clocks Raquel in the back with a shovel. And I pretty much figured it was Dakota as soon as I saw her give Raquel the shot to the back, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just guess my intuition kicked in. I mean, obviously, I guess the idea was we're supposed to believe, well, it could have been either Gigi or JC, which would have been entirely possible right up until about the point where Mandy's celebrating with them on the entrance ramp, and then they cut to the ring, and the Grim Reaper's standing over Raquel with the hood up still, and, at that point, it was like, okay, I see where this is going. And it was a cool reveal. And it actually does kind of make some story sense if you try to put it together. I've been a big fan of Dakota Kai for a long time. Not really sure if I dig the pink hairdo, but I can look past that. But even before she signed with WWE, I saw her work a match with... Oh God, who was it? I think it was Mia Yim. It must have been like 7 or 8 years ago, well before she ever signed with the company. But I thought she was really good given her experience level at that point. And I kind of figured she'd eventually get signed by WWE one way or the other. But she's a solid worker. She's a very good promo. She takes everything she does seriously. She's got a great look. She's got a lot of tools. She's not necessarily like the buffiest person out there, but she does have a decent amount of size to her. I just wish they would have done more with her in the last several years, aside from turning her heel and jobbing her out to Shayna Baszler umpteen thousand times. But that'll be a good program for them to revisit, because their takeover match over the summer was real solid, I thought. And obviously they got what they wanted out of this with getting all the belts on Toxic Attraction, so it was a fine finish. Like I said, I just wish the match could have been a standard singles match. So moving along here in this absolute catastrophe of a TV program, which apparently can't decide if it wants to be professional wrestling or Courage the Cowardly Dog. We got part 2 of this haunted house deal. And we did get an appearance from Andre Chase in this skit. Unfortunately, even Mr. Chase was not enough to make this any good. And his role in this segment didn't last all that long, because lo and behold, my prediction from last week came true. Did I not fucking say last week someone was going to get eaten by zombies on this show? Well, Carmelo, Trick, and Andre are walking down a corridor, and what happens? Zombies grab a hold of Andre, and I presume they devoured him on the spot, because we never saw Andre Chase again. And you'll be glad to know there's a happy ending to this story, because Carmelo gets his North American title back, and Johnny and Loomis scare the heels out of the home. They did at least have the decency to inform us after this abomination of a skit that this haunted house belongs to Dexter, which still doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it at least accounts for all the human bodies that roam around. I mean, he is an axe murderer, right? So, then we had the debut of Solo Sikoa. And when I say so, y'all say low. Ooh, so. Ooh, so. No, sorry, wrong guy. We also got LA Knight showing up here doing the classic "How did you know I had car trouble" shtick with Grayson Waller. And well, aside from the Sikoa debut and the fans trying to decipher whether it was Sikoa or Jey Uso with a really bad hair dye job, there wasn't really much else to add here. So then we get Fabio Ichabod and Marcel the Shell versus MSK for the tag belts. And, of course, on Halloween Havoc, a.k.a. Gimmick Palooza, can't just be a fucking straight tag match. No, this one's got to be a lumberjack match. Oh, but by the way, this might have actually been the simultaneous greatest troll job and genius costume idea I've ever seen. So Ikemen Jiro and Kushida are standing ringside as part of this crew of lumberjack geeks, and what are they dressed as? Wrestlers. No, seriously, that's not a joke. They were actual amateur wrestlers with the singlet, the headgear, and everything. Fucking howled at that. Anyway, they do the match. And it was a long match, too. I think it almost went like 15 minutes, am I right? And they're kind of just doing spots for a while, getting the occasional dump the guy to the outside where the lumberjacks beat him, and get about to the halfway point where I forget if it was Carter or Lee, but one of them does this huge leaping dive over the corner post of the lumberjacks on the outside, ends up taking out half the crew. And then like a minute later, the other MSK guy gives Marcel an RKO off the top rope onto the other set of crash pad dummies, none of whom caught them, by the way. Just want to point that out. And, well, things just kind of break down for a minute. And after this mass brawl occurs, the lumberjacks just disappear. Guess they figured, nah, fuck it, we got our paycheck, let's go. And they end up doing 6,000 moves at the end, all the WrestleMania false finishes you could strum up. And finally, Fabio and Marcel hit the powerbomb, top rope elbow combo, and win the belts. And I have been advocating for them to get the belts off of MSK for a while now, so I guess it'd be kind of hypocritical for me to complain about the guys they put the belts on, but I mean, does anyone really give a shit about Imperium at this point? The match was mostly fine once they ditched the lumberjacks and just did a regular tag match. I don't know if all the kickouts and the counters were really warranted here, but I mean, the action was good enough. I don't know who you put them up against now, but I mean, it's not like NXT's tag division has meant anything in the last 3 or 4 years. Long gone are the days of the FTR DIY AOP matches where they were main eventing takeovers at one point not too long ago. You know, now they're just kind of belts that exist in a division that just kind of exists. And that's very unfortunate, actually, because the NXT tag division used to be one of the main drawing points, and not anymore. We had a brief Chucky skit where he was talking about Rex Steiner growing up hearing scary stories about a supposed bloodthirsty killer with a, and I quote here, constant need for pain and suffering. To which I snarkily wrote down, I think you may have been confusing that with a family dinner where Scott Steiner was carrying the conversation. Either that or Chucky's conflating Rex's dreams with watching old Scott Steiner promos from WCW. Anyway, speaking of Rex, we got the match. Pretty much the only thing on the show worth giving a damn about, in my humble opinion. It was him and Tommaso Ciampa for the NXT title. No gimmicks, no fucking spin the wheel, make a deal bullshit. Just two straight shooters fighting for the top prize of the brand. Don't need to overcomplicate it. Hey, God, I'll tell you what, man. Strictly judging Steiner from the hype promo beforehand, you can just tell this guy gets it. Every word that guy utters in a promo just sounds genuine. It's so clear-cut. Everything is, I want the title, and I'm going to hurt Ciampa to win the title. So refreshing. So then we get the match, and I have a whole lot to say about it, but where to even begin? Well, first of all, I love the face paint from Ciampa here. That looked really cool. Can't really say I understood the reference, but I'm sure there was some symbolic meaning behind it. As far as action goes, it was a very simple match with a very simple story. Steiner was in control early on, did a lot of heavy hitting offense on Ciampa, tossed him around for a while, and pretty much as the match went along, they played up the fatigue factor of Steiner struggling to maintain endurance and, keep up the pace. It was interesting in the way the audience was split too. Like most of the match, they were pretty pro Ciampa, and they definitely showed by the end when they were doing the 1-2 exchanges, and the crowd clearly favored Ciampa over Steiner. That said, there were still audible chants of "Let's go Steiner" and people doing the dog barking. And when I say "Let's go Steiner," I mean "Let's go Breaker," but I refuse to refer to that guy as the name they've given him. Obviously, there was the very notable botch on the second rope where Steiner lost his balance and went crashing down on the mat. And yeah, he definitely lost his footing a little bit with the pacing, but you know what? I'll tell you why this was okay. Ciampa was professional, he calmed Steiner down, and they recovered very well with the audible. They didn't panic, they didn't rush into anything, they just said, all right, that didn't go according to plan, let's improvise for a little bit. And Steiner ended up making a nice little comeback at the end. Ciampa fed for him very well. They end up brawling on the outside where Ciampa gave Steiner the DDT on the exposed concrete. Nice little bit of juice there at the end too. Not sure if the color was fortuitous or not, but definitely added to the match. And they end up going with a real good finishing sequence here. Ciampa rolls him back in, gets the first fairy tale ending for a near fall, which he facially sells perfectly. Gets Steiner up to his feet, starts clubbing him in the face a few more times to wear him down, and finally puts him away with the second fairy tale. And I was genuinely surprised with the finish. Gun to my head, man, a week ago, I really had believed they were going all in on Braun here. I totally thought they were going to Brock Lesnar his ass all the way to the top. That said, if they were going to go with Ciampa here, this was probably about the best finish you could possibly do to protect Steiner. Is it the right call to have Ciampa retain given Steiner's level experience? Yeah, probably. Could they have put the belt on him? Yeah. But should they have? If the show wasn't being broadcasted on a national cable network, I could probably make a valid case for the title switch. But when I really think about it after the fact, yeah, this was probably the right call. Would I have booked the match to begin with if I was not going to put the belt on Steiner? No, not at all. Unless I was booking some kind of bullshit running angle at the end, I would not have done this match if Steiner was going to lose. Especially when he's only had a handful of matches since his debut. Do I think the eventual plan is to get the belt on him? Yeah, I could see that being a future project they build into next year. So, I'm not mad or disappointed with the finish. I just think it probably would have been in their best interest to hold off on it if they were not going to have Steiner win clean. So, that's all I'm going to say about it. But I guess it doesn't matter now, right? Considering I'm ditching the show for greener pastures and replacing it with some content that I think will suit my standards a little better. I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't share some final thoughts about the show. Look, NXT was a very important show for me for a variety of reasons. In many ways, it really kept my interest level in professional wrestling up, especially for WWE, during a time where I probably was the least invested in the product altogether. I've taken breaks from watching wrestling throughout my life, but I had given up following main roster WWE probably around 2015 or 2016. I'd stream the pay-per-views, and I'd always make sure I check out the big four shows every year just to see what they're doing. But as far as following Raw or SmackDown on a week-to-week basis, that was way out of the question for me. Once the Authority took over my television screen, I tapped out at that point. But I've followed NXT from humble beginnings, as one might say. From the god-awful game show thing they tried in 2010 to the whole reboot, and from 2014 all the way up to now. NXT was essentially the only WWE content I was consistently following, and it's basically been that way for about 7 years now. Like I said, with the main roster pay-per-view exceptions. And I was willing to give the whole reboot a try. I wanted to see how drastic the changes were going to be. And, be honest with you, I think in a lot of ways, even my enjoyment of NXT has really kind of been on life support long before the reboot. Like, the pandemic era of NXT was really the start of just seeing the quality on this show deteriorate drastically. Like, yeah, you still had guys like Cole and Balor and Ciampa and Lee and Priest and Riddle, guys like that around. But you could just see the quality start to dip incrementally in the last year or so. Especially when they started doing the mass call-ups and started depleting half the NXT roster in a given period. It just made it impossible to get invested in anything because, like, as soon as they would start writing stories for characters, things would have to get dropped because someone would get called up. Title reigns started to become less meaningful. People would just appear and disappear at random with no explanation. I think they started trying to implement too much on the show every week, and they really just kind of lost the plot along the way. I would say that I was never a particular fan of the whole PWG era of NXT, where it was mostly guys going out there every week and doing no-sell spot fest matches with little meaning or reason. But at least I could defend some of it by saying the wrestling was enjoyable, especially when the fans were involved. But once you took away the crowd and you factor in all the other stuff I just mentioned, it was only a matter of time before my level interest peaked. And ushering in this whole new era of NXT with 80s WWF cartoon characters and wacky skits and mostly underwhelming squash matches every week, there's just not enough to warrant my attention, especially not for 2 hours. And I could at least look past the crappy squash matches if they just let guys and girls talk. They had compelling feuds that they were building up each week, but they're nowhere near that level right now. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll check the material out at the beginning of next year just to see how they're doing. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Rex Steiner, and I really do wish that guy the best because I think he has an incredible future for him in WWE if they stick the course with him. And I would like to know, too, if they're still going to be doing these NXT TakeOver shows in the future. Because if they are, maybe that would be a good time for me to catch up and see what they're offering at something pay-per-view quality. And, it's not to say everything on the show is bad. It's really not. But there's just not enough good stuff to keep me invested every week. AEW has a lot of bullshit from week to week, but they at least have enough good material that I can look past the crap I hate. But Rex Steiner is not enough to make the show worth a 2-hour struggle. So, rip NXT. It's been a fun 7-year ride, but the NXT 2.0 experiment for me is pretty much run its course now. Anyway, let's transition over here to talking about Dynamite from October 27, 2021. I was wondering whether or not I should do my overall thoughts at the end or the beginning just to change things up a bit. Actually, you know what? Second thought, let's hold off on that. I kind of want to build up to the calamity instead of diving into it at the onset. Because, do I have a thing or two to say about that main event? So, first match of the night was CM Punk versus Bobby Fish. And looking back at the show in hindsight, I kind of wish it was the only match of the night. No, that's not entirely fair. There was another good match on the show. And no, it wasn't the main event. Work here from both guys was solid. Yeah, Fish spent a while working over Punk's right knee. Ended up kicking Punk's leg out from under his leg several times throughout the match. I guess Punk has worked in a new story to his wrestling matches now. Like, he's actually generated a large section of the crowd to pop when he does body slams. Which is either a testimony to just how great CM Punk is or just how god-awful the business is now. But yeah, they built to a nice little comeback at the end. Traded some falls on the mat. Fish kept trying for the heel hook on Punk and they did a couple roll-throughs. Punk eventually snatches Fish up onto his shoulders and hits the GTS for, I guess, the clean win. Not particularly sure whether or not the finish was botched, because Fish kicked out at like 3.01, and even Punk was kind of unsure as to how to react to it. Maybe they'll make a story out of it and build to a rematch, which I guess would be fine. Bobby Fish is a weird entity in AEW right now. Like, I've always been a huge fan of his. I mean, his Undisputed Era run with O'Reilly goes without saying in WWE. I mean, that was a lot of fun. But I even remember enjoying a lot of his work in Ring of Honor years back, especially when he was pushed as a singles guy. He always seemed to be fairly charismatic and decent promo. But him in AEW, I mean, I know it's kind of a joke cliche at this point, but he really is like the pure definition of just another guy right now. I don't know if he needs like a promo or a video package, a manager, a feud. But right now, I'm just not getting a whole lot of plain old Bobby Fish. You know, much like I'm not getting a whole lot of CM Punk either, but maybe that's a topic for a different date. We had a Malachi Black skit where, God, the only thing I can hope for when it was over was please tell me they're not going to do a 4-3 match with him and Cody. But there was more to come on that later in the night, so don't think I'm glossing over it. MJF beat some guy named Bryce Donovan, who, honestly, I mistook as Nick Jackson for a split second. So, after MJF kills that poor schlub, he did a heat promo on Darby Allin in the Boston crowd. Took a minute to talk about how it was also the same billing that he beat Hangman Page in to become the Diamond Ring winner, and that after Full Gear, he was going to be one step closer to the AEW World title, which if there's anything that would greatly benefit AEW right now, it is building to MJF winning the title at some point next year. Give me something to genuinely look forward to with this company in 2022. So anyway, he's calling out Sting here, and of course MJF does the Shawn Michaels fake out with trolling the fans with Sting's music, which, I mean, I like MJF and never been the biggest HBK fan in the world, but yeah, Shawn did it better. In fact, Shawn was such a genius, he was able to fake the fans out twice in the same segment. And this all led to the lights, of course, going out. MJF's trying to brush it off like Spears and Wardlow are trolling him, and we get a video pre-tape playing of Darby laying out someone in an MJF mask and putting him through a table. And when the lights come on, the young, fresh-faced Sting lays out all the heels with a baseball bat as MJF bolts over the barricade on the outside. And either Darby utilized his God-given psychic skills to know that MJF was going to leap over this particular part of the barricade so that Darby could reveal himself under the Invisible Man coat, or this might have been a little too choreographed and planned for me. Either way, Darby chases MJF up the ramp, babyfaces send Spears and Wardlow packing, and, well, Darby calls for them to cut his music. And as I'm sitting there expecting some kind of fiery babyface promo from Darby, he just goes, MJF, Full Gear. And it was right about that point that it set in, oh yeah, that's right. Darby sucks at promos and has no desire to get better at them. Or is that Jungle Boy I'm thinking of? Yeah. Either way, pretty lame finish to the segment. But I'm still looking forward to the match at the pay-per-view. I kind of expect Darby to go over, although progression-wise, I'd probably have MJF win, because, I mean, after that Chris Jericho feud, that dude could really use a pivotal pay-per-view win right now. We had a backstage deal with Tony, Britt Baker, and crew, and all to set up a match with Britt and that one chick, Abaddon, who I think I saw her in the Women's Casino Battle Royal at All Out and passionately skipped through all of her garbage material. So we'll see how much I can withhold the urge to hit the fast forward button on Friday. In fact, I think that'll be a true testament to how good Britt Baker really is. Can she get a good match out of fucking Abaddon? Highly doubt it. Up next was Sammy Guevara and Ethan Page for the TNT title, with all the stipulations from last week going in. I've always been really on the fence about Ethan Page. I love his promos, and he's a tremendous heel, but his matches and the content he's been given to work with, I've just never gotten on board with a lot of it. I hated that coffin match he had with Darby over the summer. And the thing is, I can't even really blame Ethan for that, because, he's a great worker. It's just a dumb gimmick match that only ever worked when The Undertaker was involved. But I just feel like they don't use this guy enough. I feel like he could do so much more if they just gave him the time. This match had good parts and bad parts, depending on how you look at it. They spent the first few minutes here brawling around ringside, which, if I remember correctly, I think Sammy jump-started, which I've never been a particular fan of that booking style in pro wrestling, unless it was the babyface making the beeline to the ring to beat up the heel who was already in the ring. But when you do it the other way around, where the babyface is targeting the heel right before he has a chance to enter the ring, it just makes the babyface look like a coward, so I didn't dig that. And Sammy's also a real frustrating guy for me to be able to figure out, in that he can do a lot of impressive stuff, and most of it looks fantastic when he does it. And he does seem to have a natural babyface charisma to him, especially when he's going in there against much bigger guys. But he really needs to work on moderating the flashy stuff he does, because his selling needs a lot of work. And, maybe that could be a reflection on Ethan Page needing a little bit of work in his selling too, because, like I said, they did a lot of moves here, but I'm not sure the spacing and the execution of the moves were in the right spots, if that makes any sense. Best example I could come up with here is the stuff they did at the end, because it was way too cute for me. Page goes to hit Sammy with the Razor's Edge off the top rope, but Sammy reverses it into a real nice looking Hurricane Rana. But instead of him going up for a top rope splash or something to seal the deal, he goes for the running shooting star, which Page immediately rolls out of the way of, thus no selling the flip bump he just took off the top rope. And then after Page tries to immediately pick Sammy up for another Razor's Edge, Sammy cradles him and wins out of nowhere with the flash pin. It was way too much and way too short a time span, and it just made absolutely no effort to sell any of the previous moves that led up to it. And there were other parts in the match that had the same problem. When Sammy hit that really nice shooting star to the outside, and he's selling the ribs momentarily after hitting it, but then he rolls Page back into the ring, and they start doing more shit, and pretty soon Page is back on offense, no selling the dive from the outside. I don't know. The whole thing to me just felt too much of a get your shit in match, and I hate those types of matches. But, like I said, Sammy wins, so he gets to pick the MMA guys that are part of this 10-man tag at the pay-per-view, which apparently it's going to be a street fight now, which means no DQ, which means everyone just hit each other with a bunch of furniture, because that's all no DQ street fight matches are in pro wrestling anymore, which probably means I'll hate it. I guess I should talk a little bit about the Afterbirth promo from the Inner Circle. Actually, I thought about it after the show, and I think the whole pomp and circumstance entrance for the Inner Circle is a genius idea on the surface. Especially when you're factoring in run-ins and stuff. Man, you got to give Jericho at least a solid 3 minutes to catch his breath. It's a long run from that entrance tunnel to the ring. But Jericho was able to gather himself there to basically talk about the street fight deal, and says they'll pick the top team fighters on next week's show. And Jericho capped off by attempting to recite Aerosmith lyrics from Sweet Emotion, which, as an Aerosmith connoisseur growing up, gravely offended me to the degree that he botched the lyrics. And granted, it was paraphrased, but I think he said something along the lines of, "You talk about things that nobody cares. You're wearing all the things that nobody wears. You're calling us out, but let me make clear as glass. Full gear, honey, we're going to kick your effing ass." And Steven Tyler's probably rolling on the floor laughing at this debauchery, but for anyone that actually grew up listening to Aerosmith and can pretty much name every song on every album and can recognize any one of their tunes if you played like 1 to 2 seconds of it, this offended me. Come on, Chris, Sweet Emotion? Like, that's not even the best song on that second set of the Toys in the Attic album. At least Walk This Way had a cool drum groove. But I'll tell you what, man, Uncle Salty, that's where that shit's at. But I'll forgive Chris for putting me in a pissing mood, because after that interview, we got this Tony Schiavone, Eddie Kingston, Bryan Danielson deal, which was very well done. I think they actually did some kind of side story over the weekend where Danielson did a promo on Kingston saying he doesn't take his work seriously, he doesn't work hard, blah, blah. And Kingston took him in here to retort back and put Danielson in his place, which kind of made Danielson look like a tool. But, the whole premise was that Danielson wanted a more fired-up Kingston, and by getting under his skin, it'll bring out a more angered version of him when they have their first-round match. That's great. Would have been nice to hear the initial Danielson promo on the show instead of on the internet, but whatever. And I'm a big fan of Eddie Kingston, man. I just wish, A, they would do more with him, and B, get rid of Jon Moxley so that Eddie Kingston would actually stand out as the crazy, off-the-wall, rowdy Roddy Piper type, because God knows Mox is trying to emanate that for years and can't do so because he sucks. So after this, we cut to another interview with Tony and the Lucha Bros back in the building. Okay, I've been putting this off for weeks now, but I think it is a question worth asking. Are we sure Tony's not a time traveler? Or are we just supposed to know that the backstage interviews are pre-taped and aren't supposed to be occurring live? Like, I can at least suspend my disbelief to a degree when they cut from the ring to a Tony interview, because hypothetically, I could buy the idea that Tony leaves the desk a few minutes before the match to conduct his interview. Now, when he would know when to leave the desk is another matter entirely, unless he knew by happenstance how long the match was going to go. But when they cut from backstage skit to backstage skit with Tony in the previous shot, okay, you've lost me. Anyway, Lucha Bros just said they'll put the belts on the line against FTR at the pay-per-view, which, I mean, didn't we already get clarification that was happening anyway? Maybe not. Whatever. Well, here's the good news. We got a women's match not involving Penelope Ford. Even better news, it was a match involving Serena Deeb. And probably the best news, drumroll, it was a good match. Very good match, in fact. Easily the best women's match I've seen in AEW this year. I mean, you could take that Britt Baker Thunder Rosa lights out match and shove it. But let the record show that I was able to fully enjoy a women's match on AEW for a change. And I'll give Sheeta credit here too, because she earned it. Like, I've never been a particular fan of hers, and I thought her long reigning women's championship run sucked hard cock. But, her ring work has always been relatively solid. It was a very simple match. Deeb worked over Sheeta's left knee, and yeah, it was basically the same story they did with the opener with Punk and Fish, but we'll overlook that. Sheeta had a real nice flurry of offense midway through. I love the deal on the outside where Sheeta went to use the chair to do that leaping drop kick, but Deeb just goes, no, fuck you, we're not doing that. She just shoved the chair out of the way. Traded some falls back and forth at the end, and it all led to where Deeb goes for that little trophy gimmick in the corner, which still not really sure why they're just leaving it ringside instead of keeping it at the timekeeper's table, but whatever. So Sheeta kicks Deeb in the gut, teases using the gimmick, but hands it off to Aubrey. Deeb rakes Sheeta's eyes for a near fall, but Sheeta pretty much immediately cradles Deeb and gets the win. And then, of course, immediately after the bell, Deeb jumps Sheeta, Pillmanizes her leg with the chair, and puts her in the single leg crab while every AEW official and Jerry Lynn struggle to pry the 110-pound Sarita Deeb off of Sheeta. But if you look past that, it was a very well done afterbirth. And one for story purposes that if they really wanted to milk it, they could easily write Sheeta out of the tournament altogether and build up to a big blow-off match with her and Deeb later on. I still think Deeb going over would have made for a cooler story. Like, honestly, Serena beating Sheeta here, winning the whole tournament, building up to a story of Sheeta finally beating Serena for the TBS title at a later date. Kind of think that would have been a more interesting long-term program. But, what they did was fine. And, well, now we just hope that Thunder Rosa can carry the rest of this tournament to something semi-watchable. I wish her luck. Up next, we had Jon Moxley killing 10 in this Eliminator tournament, which doesn't really need any further elaboration. Nor do I want to really give it the time of day. And then we had this Cody Rhodes segment. So, as to be expected, following the outcome of his match with Malachi on Saturday, the people booed him vociferously, but he acknowledges that he hears the boos, he's read the articles, perhaps including my recent Chairshot article, although I highly doubt it. He's heard the retired managers shouting at the clouds about it. He says he could have beaten Black with the pedigree, but he decided that that would have been too easy. And granted, he did not openly use the word pedigree, but I think we all know. Well, his rationale for not turning heel is that he loves the fans, which is just about as John Cena an answer as you can possibly contrive, but for the sake of humoring, I was willing to let him elaborate further on it, and pretty much he just said that he loves the people and he loves his coworkers, and he just doesn't have it in his heart to be someone he's not. So as my article thesis directly indicates, and Cody proved in this segment, Cody Rhodes does indeed live in his own artificial reality. He genuinely believes that he is the superhero to these people, despite the clear and abiding evidence to the contrary. I don't think people understand just how incredible this troll job is. And one that I think really needs further delving into, because I think I am going to use this as my final talking point on Monday's show to cover this whole Cody Rhodes article, because it is incredibly fascinating. Everything that I wrote about in that article is, by its own right, sadistically and covertly true. Like, unless this is some effort to conceal and tease a heel turn at a later date, and that this is all an illusion and part of an act. Everything that I wrote in that article is being justified on TV as we speak. So, yeah. I think that is definitely going to be our final talking point on Monday's show, because this is literally the feud of 2021. This is the greatest storyline of this entire year, no question. AEW fans versus Cody Rhodes. And if you don't believe me, you really need to think further about that, because this is a long time coming. Anyway, despite the people continuing to shower Cody Cena with booze here, Andrade made this segment worse by coming out to talk. Because, as I stated on Monday's show, and will reiterate here, WWE and AEW just can't figure it out with this guy that there is a reason for mouthpieces and managers in pro wrestling, specifically for guys that A, can't cut promos worth of shit, and B, guys whose accents are so damn thick you can't understand them anyway. Andrade falls into both of these categories, so what do? They let him cut his own promos because they're idiots. So, I can make out like maybe 50% of what Andrade said. I'm not even going to attempt to reiterate it. But long story short, Malachi Black shows up, missed Cody in the face, and heels beat down the faces, that whole deal. Pac eventually runs out for the save, which, again, really makes me want to see Pac feud with Malachi. Cody and Andrade doesn't really do a whole lot for me as a singles program, but hey, I guess when you're creatively stifled, everyone just swap dance partners. Cody, you feud it with Black. Pac, you feud it with Andrade. Let's roll reverse. How original is that? Slow clap for Tony Khan, everyone. Give it up for Booker of the Year. And in our amateur hour main event, which really was the perfect embodiment of all you need to know about All Elite Wrestling in a nutshell, it's the Dark Order all dressed up in cheap-looking Halloween costumes versus the Elite in the Ghostbusters outfits. And I guess because either I wasn't put through enough torture already, or I enjoy inducing the stress hormones in my amygdala, I decided to subject myself to this catastrophe. Oh, and again, I have to include this drop here.
Hey, Colt Cabana, how you doing?
Like Ghostbusters? Like, as much as I would shit on the segment just the same, I could at least buy the costume gimmick if the Elite had dressed up as something that fit their personality types. They couldn't just go with the Three Stooges. Yeah, I know there are four of them, but I mean, Adam Cole could easily play the role of Shemp. To tell you the truth, like, I think JR summed this up best when he was talking about the Elite. He said, "These guys run this place." To which I said, of course. And that's why this product will never be taken seriously by anyone not already part of this niche market that watches this horse shit every week. The so-called leaders of this organization are in the main event doing goofy comedy in Ghostbusters outfits and making a mockery of everything they do. You tell me, what casual mainstream fan is going to want to watch that? Most of them already watch the shitty sports entertainment version of wrestling on the other network every week. Why would they have any desire or incentive to watch it on another network? And, to be frank, this is why I make sure I don't overhype anything Kenny Omega and the Bucks ever do. Because even in those rare instances where you get probable matches of the year contenders with Omega versus Danielson on TV, less than 4 weeks later, Kenny Omega is participating in one of the worst TV matches I've seen all year. Meanwhile, part of me was actively trying to convince myself that Adam Cole wasn't involved in this because I still have a shred amount of respect for him, but he's really been testing my patience as of late. Anyway, they did a bunch of stuff. I wrote virtually none of it down. A, because it was too much shit to keep track of, and B, it was every multi-man AEW match you've ever seen rolled into one, just with worse looking outfits. Of course, they had a ref bump in this match, as if it fucking needed one to begin with. As if there were any rules being enforced from the outset. So, of course, the finishing deal here. God, I can't believe I'm going to fucking recap this, but this was really the only thing I took extensive notes on. So it's all pandemonium at the end, and everyone's just kind of doing spots while Rick Knox is sleeping in the corner. All of a sudden, two of the Dark Order clowns run down with the guy in the horse costume that came out during their entrance. He gets in the ring and starts trying to wave off the Elite guys, and of course they all lay out that ass hat thinking it's one of the Dark Order goons. Of course, they take off the horse's head, and it's the horse's ass of the Elite, Brandon Cutler. Thank you. I'll pick up my tip money at the door. And by the way, I know Cutler's mouth was taped here, but why he didn't just remove the horse head when he got into the ring, I couldn't tell you. Not like his hands were tied or anything. Anyway, so they're all shitting themselves in the ring. Everyone's getting laid out except Matt Jackson, and that is when the Marshmallow Man is standing behind Matt, and he reveals himself to be Hangman Page, who I was greatly hoping had enough self-respect to remove himself from the involvement of this horse crap, but even Page got sucked into the vacuum of bad comedy. And Page, of course, lays waste to Matt, kills Kenny with the Deadeye. I think this is about the point where JR really began to question why he ever signed a contract with his company to begin with. And somehow the Dark Order won. I don't know how, I really don't care. And I guess I should just remind everyone out there that two of the guys involved in this skit are going to be main eventing a pay-per-view in a few weeks. For the world title, no less. All the while, CM Punk is in the background beating his meat and collecting a paycheck, and Bryan Danielson's wrestling great TV matches most weeks, and he already feels like an afterthought. Oh yeah, and apparently the Booker of the Year has signed off on this. Thanks for that one, Tony. Doing a great job, man. Just keep getting after it. Just keep riding off people week after week by doing shit like this. What'd they do on Saturday? Like a little under 600,000 total viewership. All the while, just 2 weeks prior, they were doing well over 1 million. Like, are we just going to pretend that's coincidental? God forbid I dare even bring up the Rampage numbers. Just over the last 2 months. Like, what is it? Something like going a little over 1 million viewers in late August, and now they're barely surpassing the 500,000 mark? Like, you think that's coincidental too? Or could it be that despite how much people pump everything AEW does, maybe it turns out the interest level in this product really isn't as big as people make it out to be? And that's with the newest acquisitions of guys like Punk and Danielson and Cole and Black and Andrade, the list goes on. I really am going to be interested to see what the numbers are in this segment. Like, I really want to know how the last quarter of the show did. I genuinely want to know if people actually stuck around to watch this. Because if this segment either kept the audience or generated viewership in any way, I think that'll be the ultimate statement as to where professional wrestling has fallen to in the year 2021. Like, are we just supposed to presume that Adam Page and Kenny Omega's pay-per-view match is unimportant? Because the impression I got here was the title match is a joke anyway, So who cares if the world champion is doing stupid comedy at the end of the night? And who cares if the challenger for the title showed up under a marshmallow outfit after getting laid out and kayfabe written off of television to sell an injury for several weeks? Because I can tell you, after watching this show, I have no desire to see Hangman Page win the AEW title at Full Gear. In fact, I hope he doesn't. Because he hasn't earned it after watching this garbage. At least I would hope that anyone that takes the business seriously wouldn't approve of Page winning the belt at the pay-per-view right now. Okay, called me one of those old-timer that screams at the cloud ranters. So like I said on Monday's show, I'm a straight shooter when it comes to this stuff. When AEW does something good, I make sure to point it out. I like the Punk Fish opener. The women's match was very good. Even though I wasn't a particular fan of the Ethan Page-Sammy Guevara match, both guys are extremely skilled and they did some nice looking stuff in the match. And the Pinnacle Darby and Sting segment was cool. On the other hand, when AEW does stupid shit like what they did in the main event, I will be the first to jump on it and call it out for its bullshit. I don't care if it's Halloween. I don't care if they're trying to do something holiday festive. I don't care about any of that. It's sports entertainment garbage, and if AEW wants to be anti-WWE, they need to do anti-sports entertainment. Like, if anyone ever proposed something like this in Mid-South or World Class or NWA, WCW, they'd be burned at the stake. And here's the thing too. I just thought about this. Let's play a role reversal for a minute. Had WWE done this exact same thing on Raw, how would you react to it? Would you be defending it? Would you be looking for highlights? Or would you be doing what I'm doing right now and shitting on it? Because if this exact same thing did happen on WWE programming, I would equally call it out the same as stupid. I know we expect WWE to do stuff like this, so we would probably be numb to it, but it's a defense mechanism issue. Because I guarantee you, I promise you, you will have people either praising this or trying to look for excuses to validate it. So, swap the circumstances. If WWE did this exact same thing, would you shit on it? Because you should. It would be equally as dumb. So why would you defend it if AEW does it? I mean, I know you got guys like Shivani and JR around, trying to pretend it's all well and good, but you look me deadpan in the face and tell me that JR was glad to be calling this live. I'll laugh in your face if you try and sell me on that. He knew this sucked, and he made no bones about it. And good for him, because he needed to call it out. I want to be excited to see Kenny Omega and Hangman Page's blow-off match for the title. Because this has been a relatively decent feud, if you think about it. I hate all the Dark Order stuff, and to an extent, Page has kind of cooled off a little bit in the last year, but there is still a genuine excitement to see him win that world title. And I think there's still a part of me that wants to see him win the title. But not when he's involved with this kind of stuff. Like I said, I want to be excited about it. But all this main event segment did was make me never want to see anything involving Page or Omega again. And that's very counterintuitive. All in all, I think I'll wrap things up for the show this week. I've gone on long enough. And I was kind of planning on going long to begin with, especially knowing it was the last NXT show I was going to be recapping for a while. Next week, though, the Friday shows are going to have some different material on it. We'll begin the show on Friday with the AEW report, or the Dynamite report. And then after we knock that out, we'll do the NWA World Championship Wrestling Studios show starting in November of '85 from the library. And after that, we'll cover World Class Championship Wrestling starting November of 82 and working our way through that library as well. So, nice little bit of retro recaps to replace NXT, which should be a lot of fun. And again, it'll give me a chance to make better use of my Peacock subscription. Anyway, we will be back on Monday to talk about AEW Rampage. I believe NWA had that By Any Means Necessary pay-per-view, or whatever it is. I can't even really call it a pay-per-view at this point. And we are going to close things out by talking a little more in depth about Cody Rhodes, because I really do believe that he has one of the most appealing stories going on in professional wrestling right now that a lot of people are glossing over and dismissing. So I would like to further elaborate on that and see if I can get anybody to put their perspective into it as well. So until then, take care all. Thanks for watching.